Hello and welcome to the GD Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Druk. It's Election Day in Virginia's 11th Congressional District on Tuesday. Call it an amuse-bouche for Virginia's statewide elections this November. The special election following Democrat Jerry Connolly's death in office is not expected to be competitive. Harris won the district by 34 percentage points in 2024, but it gives us one more data point to assess how the parties are doing in special elections. So far this year, Democrats are overperforming by double digits. Also, how about those job numbers? Friday's jobs numbers were not good and may add momentum to Americans' pessimism about Trump's handling of the economy. It's a very different dynamic to Trump's first term, when Americans approved of his handling of the economy, even if they didn't like him overall. So how should we make sense of that? And lastly, a recent New York Times analysis of population trends paints a dire picture for Democrats' electoral college math next decade, with red states gaining electors and blue states losing them. But is it good data, bad data, or not data? Here with me are two trusty hands, Nathaniel Rakich and Mary Radcliffe. Mary, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Galen, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Nathaniel, likewise, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Galen.
So before we get started, I want to send out a quick call for listener questions. We've got a mailbag episode coming up. If you have questions about politics, elections, the meaning of life, paid subscribers can reach me in the paid subscriber chat. Everyone else, you can reach me on X, Blue Sky, I guess Instagram, although that's mostly a place for like puppies and nice interior design, but you can reach me there if you want to. We also have an email address that is galen@gdpolitics.com. In case you don't know how to spell my name, it's Galen. Okay, let's get to it. Are we ready to talk about an election, a real live election that's coming up in an off year?
First, I want to hear what the meaning of life is.
42.
Yeah, the correct answer. Okay. Do you get that joke, Galen?
I don't.
Okay, wow.
But enlighten me.
You're banned from this podcast. Not nerdy enough.
Yeah,
Everyone is screaming at their AirPods right now. Galen, read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I believe you can actually see on my shelf.
I cosplay as a nerd.
Yeah, right, exactly. You're a pretender is what you're saying. That's a nice way of saying you're a pretender.
Yeah, so, I play a nerd on TV, but in my normal life, what do? Like, the most recent thing I read was the unauthorized biography of Gwyneth Paltrow. Mm-hmm. So if you have any questions about Goop or the Goop business, I'm happy to talk about that.
Well, then it's a good thing Nathaniel and I are here.
Okay, now that I've thoroughly embarrassed myself, Nathaniel, as a Washingtonian, the Virginia 11 special election is in your backyard. It's in the fancy northeastern Virginia suburbs of Washington, D.C. What should we know about it?
You should know that it's just a very blue district. As you mentioned, it's in the northern Virginia suburbs, which is an area that has famously gotten a lot more Democratic over the last 20 years and has, in fact, turned Virginia into a fairly reliably blue state. So yeah, it's not expected to be competitive. This is, as you mentioned, Democratic held seat that used to be held by Jerry Connolly. He retired before he passed away, and he endorsed his former staffer, James Walkinshaw, to succeed him. Walkinshaw won the primary easily, and he is going to win the general election easily. Obviously, with special elections, we are always paying attention to the margin of victory and kind of comparing it to past benchmarks like the presidential result in the district. We already have a lot of evidence from previous special elections this year that Democrats are overperforming, which is not really a new thing for Democrats in special elections. They are overperforming to an unusual degree, to a degree that we haven't seen since the 2017 and 2018 cycle, which of course probably
even more than that.
Up. Well, actually, I have some quibbles with that, but which we can talk about. But yeah, they're doing very, very well, and it is probably a good sign for them in the 2026 midterms, similar to how those 2017 and 2018 numbers were a good sign for them in the 2018 midterms.
Well, you guys have teed me up perfectly here. According to the down ballot, in special elections so far this year, Democrats have overperformed where they were in 2024 by almost 16 percentage points. I don't know myself if that's the best baseline, so maybe that foreshadows some of your quibbles, Nathaniel. I don't know. But if you compare where they are so far this year to 2020, they're overperforming by 11 percentage points. So, first of all, should we care more about their overperformance compared to 24 or 20? And then eventually we'll get to the question of what should we sort of say the benchmark for a good performance for Democrats or Republicans is in Virginia's 11th. But first, let's answer the 2020 or 2024 benchmark question, baseline question.
I mean, when we did these analyses back at 538, we had a stat called partisan lean, which was just like a blending of the last two presidential results in the district. And that is empirically better because if you forced us to choose between 2020 and 2024, I would go with 2024 because the most recent election tends to be the most relevant. But you do want to kind of hedge against some like reversion to the mean by including some like results from the previous election. So for instance, obviously in 2024, we saw a lot of shifts, particularly in like heavily like Latino areas toward Republicans. And we don't know if those trends are going to continue or not. And so it's good to kind of, hedge with including some older data as well.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think the most recent election is going to be the best representation of how voters think about politics in that district. I mean, it's tricky to do these kinds of comparisons also because when you compare to the presidential electorate, you're really comparing to like apples and oranges electorates between what you'll see in a midterm versus what you see in a presidential election. That being said, I think we have some pretty significant evidence at this point that the midterm electorate is likely to be more Democratic than the presidential electorate, just as a general like demographic rule. You tend to see a more educated electorate during a midterm. And in the last several elections, we've seen higher educated voters shifting toward the Democratic Party. So I think like all these pieces taken together are pointing towards probably a pretty good situation for Democrats, both in Virginia in November and for next year.
Nathaniel, was that your main quibble, that we shouldn't just rely on 2024?
Yeah, basically. So, I think that, the down ballot obviously does a good job of collecting all this data, but comparing it to 2024, which was a good year for Republicans, is not the same as comparing the 2018 special election numbers to 2016, which obviously Donald Trump won that election, but in the popular vote, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. And so when you kind of like take into account the fact that like Democrats had more ground to gain from a 2024 baseline, they're actually like pretty similar. Like the overperformances are pretty similar. And you also, I think, kind of have to account for, I'm normally someone who is like, obviously with kind of like our philosophy with polling is just throw it all into the average, even the outliers and stuff like that. That said, there was this one special election in New York City earlier this year, which was just a really unique situation because it's a heavily Orthodox Jewish district, and they voted very strongly for Donald Trump in the presidential election, but also very strongly for their Democratic state legislative candidate. And so that data point alone is kind of like throwing off the average for the 2025 special elections by like a couple of points. And so if you want to throw that out, or maybe a fairer way to do would be to take the medians, which kind of accounts for kind of crazy numbers skewing it on one side or the other. You just have much closer, like it looks quite similar, I think, to the 2017-2018 special election numbers.
So if we are comparing to 2018 and saying this is similar, how much did Democrats overperform by in special elections that cycle?
On average, compared to the 2016 presidential results, Democrats overperformed by 10.6%. Those numbers are from the down ballot. If you look at just U.S. congressional races and exclude all of the like state level races and things like that, so you can try to get some of that noise out, like Nathaniel was talking about, the overperformance was 12.7% on average.
Okay. So it does look like whether you use the 2020 baseline or 2024 baseline, we're in similar-ish territory to 2018. Given that, what would you say is a good performance for Democrats in Virginia's 11th on Tuesday, and what's a good performance for Republicans, understanding that Harris won that district by 34 percentage points?
Well, I mean, I always hate this like idea of like benchmarking, right? Because it's really feeds into someone's biases, because you can be like, oh, well, like Democrats have been overperforming by, 15 points in special elections, therefore this year. So anything less than that would be a disappointment for them. But like, actually, if they only overperform by like 12 points, that's still like really good for them. So, I mean, I think the real and boring answer is your benchmark should be that 2024 number, or some kind of, average if you want to average out the 2024 and the 2020 numbers, and just look at how much better Democrats do from that and then throw it in the average. So I would expect, again, based on what we've been seeing so far in special elections, that Democrats might win this election by between 45 and 50 points. But if they win it by less than that, It's not going to be like it's certainly not bad news for them. I think it would probably raise eyebrows if Walkinshaw wins by less than Harris did, but that still wouldn't throw out the plurality of evidence that we have from other special elections this year that Democrats are really energized across the country.
Well, I do have one quibble with that, Nathaniel, because in some ways you wouldn't expect Democrats to do as well in a midterm environment as they would in a special election environment based on a lot of the trends that Mary just mentioned, right? Democrats are increasingly skewing towards this highly politically engaged, highly educated electorate. And in that kind of environment, like a special election environment where a lot of people aren't paying attention, it's the people who are mainlining the news who are going to show up. Whereas, yes, the midterms are not a general sort of presidential election, but you're going to still get 50% turnout or something like that. Whereas in a special election, you might just get like a third of eligible voters turning out or something like that.
Totally, but there's still a correlation, right? It doesn't mean that the overperformance in special elections equals the result in November, but like the better that a party does in special elections, compared to a previous year, the better they're going to do in the eventual general election. So back when we were doing this at 538, again, kind of using a more, in my opinion, kind of slightly more like rigorous baseline, we found that basically Democrats did like a few points worse in the House popular vote than they were doing in special elections previously, which kind of accounts for that fact that those special elections are going to be more demographically good for Democrats. So in 2018, we found that in special elections, Democrats overperformed by 11 points. They won the House popular vote by 9. In 2020, Democrats overperformed in special elections by 4. They won the House popular vote by 3. In 2022, they overperformed. They actually didn't overperform at all in special elections. It was neutral. Republicans won the House popular vote by 3. And then in 2024, the relationship did break down somewhat, as many people have covered, which is the Democrats overperformed in special elections by 5, but Republicans still won the House popular vote by 3.
All right. Well, we will have to wait and see until 2026 to know how that trend is continuing. But we will have an election in Virginia this November that will presumably have higher turnout than a special election because Virginians are voting for governor. Mary, how are things looking there? I mentioned that this is an amuse-bouche.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that this special election is going to tell us a ton that we don't already know about the Virginia races in November. So I do some data work for an organization called State Navigate. We focus on state level politics, so state legislatures, governors, things like that. And we have a forecast up for Virginia this November. We have Abigail Spanberger as a 97% chance of winning in November based on the
She's the gubernatorial candidate.
She's the Democratic gubernatorial candidate this November, based on, standard forecasting stuff, polling data, as well as other on-the-ground factors. And with respect to the House of Delegates, we have the Democrats at a 93% chance of winning a majority in that chamber. So we pretty much already know, based on pre-election polling, based on other various factors, these races are overwhelmingly likely to go Democratic in November, and regardless of what happens on Tuesday, which of course will be a data point fed into our model, but I don't think it will have a huge impact.
So maybe New Jersey will actually be more interesting than Virginia, which
almost certainly.
Almost certainly. Okay, well,
Many
we'll talk
people are
about that.
saying.
We'll talk about that on a future podcast. Before I move on to the jobs numbers, are there any other special election results impending or that have already happened that we want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, for the real election nerds, we've been following state legislative special elections a lot. There was a notable result a couple of weeks ago in Iowa where Democrats flipped a Republican-held state Senate district that broke Republican supermajority in that chamber. There have actually been a lot of particularly strong Democratic overperformances in Iowa specifically, special elections this year, which is interesting considering that Iowa now has an open Senate race, U.S. Senate race in 2026.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, yeah.
We forecasted that was likely to happen when I talked to Jacob Rubashkin a while back, but I don't think we've actually mentioned formally on this podcast that Joni Ernst is out.
Yeah, it actually doesn't count until we mention it on this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Joni Ernst is now officially
Joni,
out of that Senate race.
You've now been relieved of your duties. It's Galen official.
But so and of course, as probably folks know, Democrats need 4 Senate seats in order to take control of the chamber. It's going to be a difficult row for them to hoe. And Iowa is one of the probably one of their better prospects for that. So, it's interesting. I haven't specifically looked into the question of whether like state specific special election performance is predictive of state specific general election performance. I should look into that. But if it is, then maybe Democrats have a better shot in Iowa than we think.
By the same token of what Mary and I have already been talking about in terms of difference in terms of the demographics of who turns up for a special election and who turns up for a midterm election, you can potentially make the argument that's even more pronounced in Iowa because Iowa is a really white state and we see education being even a bigger dividing line within the white electorate. So if in these special elections you're getting just like a lot of college educated democratically inclined voters, when you switch to a midterm environment, you have like Ashley Hinson running a statewide campaign talking a lot about Trump, amping people up over the things that she's been talking about, like birthright citizenship and, helping farmers and all of that kind of stuff. There's a world in which you could see the shift from special elections to midterms being even more pronounced in Iowa.
I think that's right. I think another factor in Iowa is that it has a well-organized Democratic Party and infrastructure, right? Obviously, the caucuses being there for a long time really helped.
Notwithstanding Biden's attempts to overthrow their, position of power.
Right, for sure. But I think that I wouldn't be surprised if that's contributing to the unusual special election over performances in Iowa as well.
And it's also worth noting that as recently as 2012, Iowa was considered a swing state. So you do have folks in Iowa that may have some muscle memory of voting for Democrats that have switched in recent years to voting for Republicans, but would be willing to switch back.
All right. Well, more future elections to keep an eye on. Let's move on and talk about Friday's job numbers. Friday's job numbers showed a significant slowdown in hiring over the summer. The U.S. added just 22,000 jobs in August. Those are preliminary numbers. And in June, the numbers were revised to a loss of 13,000 jobs. These are the first numbers since Trump fired the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Erica McIntyre. So first things first, is there reason not to trust these numbers based on Trump's political meddling with the agency?